Welcome, my friends, to Fireside Folklore, a sleep aid series, or simply a gentle educational journey for us to take together through our topics, exploring humanity through the ages. Settle in by the hearth. Let the soft glow of the flames chase away the day's worries and lull you into a comfortable state. Let whatever surrounds you fade into the background. Let the quiet settle over your space the way dust settles on an old wooden writing desk. Slowly, gently, almost imperceptibly. Perhaps you had one in the corner of a room, off of course, in a corner of your childhood home, an old desk with a shutter that covered its top. That shutter, dusty and bleached by the gentle rays of the sun through moth-nibbled curtains, would stick sometimes. Its mechanism old and jamming, but when you finally opened it, beneath you would see what it protected from that thick layer of dust that made your nose crinkle. Old, discarded notes, some in scattered pages, others in notebooks, an old laptop, or maybe even a typewriter older than you and likely your parents. You test the keys, feeling the mechanical satisfaction as the gentle push of your finger guides the key down to the first press it's had in years, maybe decades. That's when you notice it. QWERTY, the same layout and order of keys as the one in your phone. But why? What even is QWERTY, besides a very good word in Scrabble? Well, I wanted to find out. And I've compiled all I researched in a long, tired night much like this one into the script for this video. So please, relax and listen, as tonight, you are drifting backward across more than 5 millennia of human invention. Back before keyboards, back before typewriters, back even before the idea of writing existed at all. The story of QWERTY didn't begin with metal keys or paper. It began with something much older and much softer. The human desire to remember, the human fear of forgetting, and the human need to speak to people who are not yet born. To understand the keyboard, you must understand printing. To understand printing, you must first understand the earliest marks our ancestors pressed into the world. So breathe in quietly and enjoy this journey in 5 parts in a scattering of sections. Whether you are listening to my rambling as a bedtime companion to lull you into sleep, or if you are busying yourself and need the company to work through chores in your day, I thank you for listening. Anything you get from this story makes it worth my telling, and please, let me know if anything does strike you this evening as I begin to take us far back, and leave a comment if you wake up and find this video playing. Now we go back, far back, as this journey begins long before civilization. Part 1. The dawn of writing and the long path toward printing section. 1. When the first hands touch stone. Imagine a cave tens of thousands of years ago. The air is cool and still. Flames flicker at the center of the chamber. Shadows dance along uneven walls. A small group gathers around a figure holding a mixture of ochre and charcoal. The figure presses their hand against the wall, then blows pigment across their skin, leaving behind a red silhouette. A signature. A presence, a message without words. Other people add shapes, herds of bison, lines of hunters, symbols whose meanings are lost to time, patterns that repeat across continents, as if human imagination were a shared language long before spoken dialects diverged. These images weren't writing in the way we know it, yet they were an early form of storytelling. A way to record memory, a way to teach, a way to warn, a way to say, we were here. The marks themselves were simple, but the idea behind them, preserving information outside the body, was revolutionary. For the first time, memory escaped the boundaries of a human skull. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear it. Stone receiving thought. This is where our journey begins. Section: the slow shift toward symbols. Thousands of years later, as small communities grew into villages and villages into early cities, people needed new tools to track relationships, trade, and power. A shepherd needed to know how many sheep he had traded last season. A farmer needed a record of how much grain he owed to his neighbors. A temple official needed to track offerings. A merchant needed to know debts without relying on fallible memory. Clay tokens emerged first, small shapes representing quantities or goods. A cone for grain, a sphere for livestock, a disc for oil. Simple objects, yet profoundly meaningful, but tokens alone were not enough. When trade expanded, merchants needed more detailed tracking. So instead of creating physical objects, they began marking symbols on objects. And so early writing systems were born slowly, gently, across different regions of the world. In the valleys of Mesopotamia, scribes pressed wedge-shaped impressions, cuneiform, into clay tablets using chopped reeds. Lines arranged in careful order recorded grain deliveries, births, taxes, and myths. In the Nile Delta, artists and priests carved hieroglyphs into stone and painted them on papyrus. Dozens of symbols became hundreds, representing sounds, ideas, names, and gods. In the Yellow River region, diviners etched questions into turtle shells and ox bones. Cracks formed through heat, and scribes recorded the patterns, an early form of Chinese writing, whose descendants still survive today. Each of these systems emerged separately. Each arose from a need to capture thought. Each marked another step in humanity's march toward printing. And with every new symbol carved or pressed or painted, the world took another step toward mechanical writing. Section 3. Writing becomes a profession. Writing was slow, painstaking, beautiful, and exclusive. Only trained scribes were allowed or able to record information. Their tools were delicate, reed pens sharpened by hand, clay tablets dried in the sun, ink made from soot or minerals, brushes crafted from animal hair. Scribes spent years memorizing symbols, perfecting pen strokes, and learning to maintain consistent line spacing. Text had to be flawless, not only for accuracy, but because materials were precious. A single sheet of papyrus or parchment might take a small fortune to produce. A mistake was not just embarrassing, it was costly. So writing remained slow. Reproduction remained limited. Knowledge traveled only as fast as human hands could copy it. Civilizations were becoming more complex, but writing remained bound to the pace of the individual scribe. Humanity needed a way to multiply words. The first great answer came from China. Section 4. When wood met ink, the first printed pages centuries before Europe discovered mechanical printing, Chinese artisans were experimenting with a technique that would reshape the world: woodblock printing. It began modestly: decorative patterns on fabric, seals for official documents, but soon evolved into something far more powerful. Picture a workshop during the early Tang dynasty. Woodworkers carve blocks of smooth pear wood. Calligraphers paint entire pages onto thin paper. Assistants paste the sheets ink side down onto the blocks. The ink transfers faintly, showing each delicate stroke in reverse. Then the carving begins. Each stroke of each character must remain raised. Everything else is cut away with precision and patience. A carver might spend days on a single page, carefully following the calligrapher's guide. When the carving is done, Ink is brushed across the raised surface. Paper is laid on the block, then pressed using a handheld pad made of tightly wrapped cloth. When the sheet is lifted, an entire page has transferred in a single motion. Identical copies follow. 20 copies, 50, hundreds, thousands. For the first time in history, books can spread faster than a scribe can copy them. And yet this innovation, remarkable as it was only the beginning. Woodblock printing reached its early peak in a single extraordinary work, one that deserves far more detail than a passing mention. The text that signals the dawn of the printed book, the Diamond Sutra. Section 5. The Diamond Sutra, the earliest surviving printed book. Imagine a long scroll, nearly 5.5 meters in length, made of fine paper, printed in 868 CE during the Tang Dynasty. It is delicate, almost weightless. The paper thin enough that light glows through it like a lantern shade. The scroll begins with a detailed illustrated scene carved from a woodblock. The Buddha sits beneath an elaborate canopy, surrounded by disciples. His robe drapes in soft folds. Lines form the curve of his cheek and the arch of his brow. Clouds swirl above him. Trees frame the foreground. Patterns border the scene like finely woven fabric. Chinese artisans carved this entire illustration into wood. Every line, every shadow, reversed so that it would print correctly. It also required immense skill. Carving a single nose or finger wrong would force a complete redo. After the image, a column of characters introduces the text. This is what I once heard. This phrase, standard in Buddhist scriptures, signals that the content comes from oral tradition, faithfully recited. The Diamond Sutra itself is a dialogue between the Buddha and the monk Subhuti. It explores the nature of reality, perception, compassion, and the fundamental emptiness of all things. But the sutra is not only a philosophical work, it is a masterpiece of early printing. Its creation was not accidental. It was an offering, commissioned by a man named Wang Jie in memory of his parents. The final lines state that printing the sutra would bring spiritual merit, both to Wang Jie and to anyone who read it. In this belief, printing gained a sacred dimension. It wasn't only about distributing text, it was about distributing virtue. Buddhist monasteries across China became centers of printing. Texts were copied in vast numbers. Some were buried in caves for safekeeping. Others traveled along the Silk Road. It is from a cave in Dunhuang that a pristine copy of the Diamond Sutra emerged in 1900, perfectly preserved, linking us through more than 1,000 years. This single scroll demonstrated the astonishing potential of printing, but it also revealed its limitations. Carving a new page required carving a new block. A book with 100 pages required 100 carvings. Humanity needed something faster, something modular. And in Europe, centuries after the Diamond Sutra was carved, someone was about to find it. 6. The stage awaits a metalsmith from Mainz. As woodblocks spread throughout Asia, Europe relied almost entirely on manuscript copying. Monasteries preserved knowledge, but at a pace too slow for a rapidly changing world. Literacy was growing, universities were forming, merchants needed records, clergy needed texts, governments needed documentation. Europe was waiting for someone to combine craftsmanship with innovation. Someone with the precision of a goldsmith, the patience of a craftsman, the vision of an inventor, and the stubbornness of someone who believes the impossible can be done. Johannes Gutenberg was precisely that person. And in his hands, the next chapter of this long story would unfold. A chapter that would eventually lead, step by precise step, toward the typewriter. Part 2. Gutenberg and the Age of Movable Type. A soft, detailed descent into the man, the metal, and the machines that reshaped the world. We return now to Europe in the early 15th century. The air carries the sounds of hammers striking anvils, carts rattling over cobblestones, church bells echoing from tall spires, and the quiet bustle of craftsmen moving through narrow streets. Mainz, a city along the Rhine, is alive with trade, artistry, and the slow pulse of life in the late medieval world. Here, among metalworkers and merchants, jewel cutters and engravers, lived a man whose influence would eventually reach into every modern keyboard, every printing machine, every typewriter, every computer. His name was Johannes Gensfleisch, Zur Laden zum Gutenberg. History remembers him simply as Johannes Gutenberg. Before we speak of his invention, we must understand the world that shaped him and the skills that made him uniquely suited to transform human communication forever. Section 1. The making of a metalsmith. Gutenberg was born around the year 1400 into a family of metalworkers. His father, Friedrich Gensfleisch, worked at the Episcopal Mint, which meant he handled currency dies, stamping tools, casting equipment, and the intricate mechanisms required to create coinage. Young Johannes spent much of his early life surrounded by the glitter of metal and the rhythm of production. Coins and medals were not merely decorative. They required consistency, precision, strong alloys, identical shapes in mass quantities, and above all, they demanded knowledge of molds, devices that allow identical copies of a design to be cast repeatedly. These early lessons planted a seed. The idea that something could be reproduced perfectly again and again was woven into Gutenberg's understanding of craft long before he considered the reproduction of words. His education likely included metallurgy, blacksmithing, gem cutting, polishing, stamping techniques, casting with alloys of lead and tin, engraving on metal, the creation of dies and matrices. These were all skills that would ultimately converge in his most famous invention. But the story did not unfold smoothly. Gutenberg's life was shaped by conflict, debt, and persistent reinvention. Section 2. The Strasbourg Years. An inventor in exile. Around 1428, unrest in Mainz forced several families to flee, including Gutenberg's. He settled in Strasbourg, where records show he entered into business arrangements involving polishing mirrors for pilgrims traveling to Aachen, crafting small metal objects, experimenting with mechanical devices. At the time, religious pilgrims believed polished mirrors could capture and reflect holy radiance. Though that belief may seem distant now, it kept metalworkers like Gutenberg employed. It was in Strasbourg that Gutenberg began experimenting with mechanical reproduction. Documents from court cases suggest he was building devices involving screws, press mechanisms, adjustable frames, mold-based systems. These experiments drew from everything he had learned in Mainz. Yet they were still far removed from printing. But the pieces were beginning to assemble themselves, slowly, quietly, like type aligning in a frame. And although Gutenberg would later return to Mainz, the seeds of invention had already been planted. Section 3. The idea of movable type begins to form. By the time Gutenberg returned to Mainz, sometime in the late 1430s or early 1440s, Europe was thirsting for texts. Universities had expanded. Law courts needed documents. Churches needed liturgical books. Merchants wanted contracts. Governments wanted records. Books were copied by scribes, but the work was slow. A single Bible might take a scribe more than a year to copy. Producing multiple copies required multiple scribes, each with varying skill. Errors crept in, costs soared. Humanity needed a method of reproduction that did not rely on the variability of human hands. Gutenberg, armed with knowledge of molds, metals, alloy chemistry, and press mechanisms, was uniquely positioned to solve this problem. The challenge was immense. Not one invention, but several needed to come together. A new kind of ink, a new kind of press, a precise casting mold, uniform metal type, methods for aligning letters, a stable system for transferring ink to paper, a way to maintain even pressure across a page. Gutenberg understood something essential. The technology did not yet exist. He would need to build every piece from the ground up. And this would require secrecy, partnerships, loans, and no small amount of risk. Section 4. The hand mold, the heart of the invention. If Gutenberg contributed just one thing to printing, it would be the hand mold, an adjustable metal device that allowed individual letters to be cast with perfect uniformity. Each letter required a punch, carved with the letter's design, a matrix, created by striking the punch into copper, a mold capable of receiving the matrix. Molten metal poured in to fill the shape. The resulting typepiece needed to be absolutely identical to all other pieces of that character. If the height differed even slightly, the page would print unevenly. If the width differed, the spacing would break. If the shape was inconsistent, the page would appear sloppy. Gutenberg experimented with metals until he found an alloy that offered sharp impressions, quick cooling time, durability under pressure, a predictable response to heat. Lead, tin, and antimony provided the results he needed. Every letter could now be produced repeatedly with exact precision. This was the true birth of mass production printing, a mechanical solution to a cultural need, a device that broke the reliance on human scribes. And yet, the hand mold was only one component of Gutenberg's system. Section 5. The ink, thick, dark, and revolutionary traditional inks were water-based. They flowed beautifully onto parchment when applied with a brush, but they slid off metal type. Gutenberg developed an oil-based ink, thick and sticky, containing soot, lampblack, linseed oil, varnish, pigments. This ink adhered to metal and transferred cleanly to paper, producing sharp, rich blacks, unmatched by scribes. The ink alone was a technological triumph. Combined with metal type, it became transformative. The physical properties of this ink allowed type to be inked again and again without reapplication of water, an enormous leap in efficiency. Section 6. The press, taking inspiration from Grapes Gutenberg, needed a machine that could push paper against type with consistent pressure. He looked to a familiar device, the wine press. Grapes pressed by a screw mechanism inspired the concept of the printing press. The force needed to extract juice was similar to the force needed to drive ink type into paper. Gutenberg adapted the mechanism, replacing the basket with a flat bed, replacing the screw cage with a platen, aligning type on a cradle-like surface, integrating a sliding tray that allowed quick replacement. This machine turned printing into a repeatable process rather than a labor-intensive craft. It was mechanical, it was replicable, it was powerful, and when combined with metal type and oil-based ink, it created something new. the first efficient system for mass-producing books in the Western world. Section 7. Financing, conflict, and the printing of the Gutenberg Bible. Innovation is expensive. Gutenberg needed investors. He partnered with Johann Fust, a wealthy financier who provided capital. Another craftsman, Peter Schoeffer, trained as a scribe and engraver, joined the effort. Together, they created one of the greatest works in the history of printing, the Gutenberg Bible, printed around 1455. The Bible was monumental. Over 1,200 pages, 2 volumes, 42 lines per page, perfectly aligned, printed on both vellum and paper, later decorated by hand with illuminated initials. No handwritten manuscript could match the uniformity of these pages. But success brought conflict. Fust sued Gutenberg for unpaid debt, ultimately gaining control of much of the equipment. Gutenberg lost the workshop, but printing could no longer be stopped. Schoeffer continued the business. Presses multiplied. Printers spread across Europe. By the end of the century, millions of books existed, more than all the manuscripts produced in Europe in the 1,000 years before printing. Knowledge, once locked behind the labor of scribes, now moved with unprecedented speed. And just as the Diamond Sutra had hinted at a new world centuries earlier, the Gutenberg press opened the door to one far bigger than even Gutenberg could have imagined. But like the woodblock carvers of China, Gutenberg had created a system that still required teams of people. Compositors set type, pressmen inked forms, apprentices prepared paper, binders assembled finished books. A single person could not easily produce a document alone. Yet the dream of a personal writing machine persisted. Quietly, stubbornly. It would take more than 3 centuries before that dream became real. Printing was only the first great revolution. The typewriter would be the second. And the next step toward the typewriter began with a curious English patent. Vague, mysterious, but undeniably significant. Part 3. The long path to the typewriter. The patient march of invention, one mechanism at a time. The story now moves gently into the 18th and 19th centuries, where the idea of printing transforms once again, this time into something more personal, more immediate, a way for an individual to leave marks on paper without presses, workshops, or teams of craftsmen. But before we reach the typewriter that Christopher Latham Scholes eventually shaped into the machine we recognize, and long before the QWERTY arrangement established itself, we must walk slowly through a series of early inventions. Each one, no matter how crude or forgotten, carried part of the idea forward. Think of this stage as a long river forming from many tiny streams. The typewriter was not a single invention. It was a gathering of levers, arms, plungers, cranks, cylinders, plates, keys, and dreams. Let us begin where the first legal trace appears, with an English engineer whose machine we cannot see, but whose intentions echo across every keyboard in the world. Section 1. Henry Mill's patent, A Shadow of the Future, 1714. In the year 1714, during the early reign of George III, Henry Mill, an engineer employed by the New River Company, filed a patent that historians still puzzle over. This patent, registered as British Patent number 395, contains no drawings, no diagrams, no mechanical explanations, just a short written description of a mysterious device. Mill writes of an artificial machine or method for the impressing or transcribing of letters singly or progressively, one after another. The phrasing is sparse yet striking. He is describing a machine capable of producing written characters one at a time, in sequence, forming words. This is not a printing press, not a device intended for mass reproduction of whole pages. It is something closer to a typewriter. Mill claims the machine would allow documents to be produced fair and legible, resembling those written by skilled scribes. He emphasizes uniformity, precision, consistency. And yet, because the patent lacks illustrations, its true nature remains uncertain. Was it a set of metal stamps used individually? Did it use a lever system? Did it include a platen or roller? Was it a prototypewriter? We cannot know. The device itself has been lost to time, described but never found. What matters is that Mill introduced a new idea into the world. The possibility that writing could become mechanical. That idea lingered quietly, waiting for the world to catch up. Section 2. The Slow Awakening. 18th and early 19th century attempts. Little progress followed in the decades after Mill's patent. Europe was shifting through revolutions, industrial, agricultural, social, and inventors turned their minds to other machines. Steam engines, textile looms, pumps, clocks, mills. Still, in small workshops, tinkerers continued to play with the idea of writing machines. Some created devices that guided pens along mechanical tracks. Others experimented with letter stamps. A few attempted elaborate contraptions designed to write for people who had lost the use of their hands. These early machines did not survive well. Many were personal experiments. Many broke easily. Many never left the workshop. But each introduced new pieces of the puzzle. A lever that could depress reliably. A plate that could hold a paper sheet still. A mechanism that could produce repeated impressions. A key that could activate a separate component. And slowly, the idea of a keyboard began to form. Not yet recognizable, but lurking beneath the surface. A true breakthrough, however, did not come until 1829. Section 3. William Austin Burt and the Typographer, 1829. In Detroit, on 23rd of July 1829, a surveyor named William Austin Burt received the first American patent for a machine intended specifically for writing. He called it the typographer. Burt's device was not yet a typewriter in the modern sense. If you imagine someone writing with a lever instead of a key, you begin to grasp its nature. The typographer used a lever arm attached to a rotating cylinder containing all the letters of the alphabet. When the user pulled the lever, they had to manually rotate the cylinder until the correct letter appeared beneath the printing point. Only then could they press the lever down to mark the page. It was extremely slow, painfully slow, more cumbersome than handwriting. But Burt introduced a crucial idea. A machine that transfers a letter to paper by means of an external force. Here, for the first time, was the separation of symbol from hand. A human chose the letter. The machine delivered the impression. It was a small step, but one that viaducts history toward the typewriter. And Burt's patent shows something else. Inventors were once again thinking seriously about mechanical writing. This thought would spread. Section 4. Charles Thurber and the Writing Machine for Accessibility, 1843. In the 1840s, Charles Thurber of Worcester, Massachusetts, constructed several writing devices. Thurber's focus was not speed or efficiency, it was accessibility. He wanted to create a machine that could write even when the user struggled to hold or control a pen. Thurber's design used a rotating cylindrical type wheel, similar to Burt's typographer, mounted horizontally. Individual characters were selected by turning the wheel to the correct position and pressing down. Compared to later typewriters, Thurber's device was slow, impractically slow, more deliberate than handwriting. But Thurber introduced important mechanical concepts: a stabilized paper carriage, a fixed printing point, a mechanical method for aligning symbols in neat rows. Even though his machine never became commercially successful, it pushed the idea of machine-written text forward another step. And while Thurber was trying to make writing easier for those with disabilities, a different inventor was dreaming of speed, dreaming of a machine, not unlike an instrument. Section 5. Giuseppe Ravizza and the Cembalo Scrivano, 1846. Giuseppe Ravizza, an Italian inventor, built one of the most recognizable ancestors of the modern typewriter. His 1846 creation, the Cembalo Scrivano, literally the writing harpsichord, was a direct attempt to merge musical keyboard principles with writing. Ravizza's machine used a front-facing keyboard, each key connected by a complex linkage to a type bar positioned at a common printing point. When a key was pressed, its corresponding type element swung upward, striking the ribbon and marking the paper. This mechanism is immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with later typewriters. Ravizza had keys, type bars, a ribbon, a printing point, a keyboard layout, and a reasonably fast mechanism. It was not yet refined. The keys were stiff. The linkage could jam. The mechanism was exposed to dust. But the concept was nearly complete. Ravizza had shown that writing could be played, typed, like music. His machine foreshadowed the entire next century of typing innovations. And while Ravizza was demonstrating musical writing machines in Italy, another inventor in France was quietly refining a different mechanism. Section 6. Xavier Progan and the Sliding Type Bars, 1833-1843. Xavier Progan is not as well known as Ravizza or Bird, yet his machines introduced key mechanical components that would later define the typewriter. Progan used sliding type bars, metal arms that moved horizontally instead of vertically. Each type bar carried a single letter. When a key was pressed, the type bar slid forward on a track until it reached the printing point. This lateral motion solved a number of problems. It reduced the risk of downward impact jams. It allowed multiple type bars to travel within the same guide system. It created a smoother, more predictable movement. While Progan's machines were never mass-produced, they contained a conceptual breakthrough. Letters did not need to be arranged on a rotating wheel. They could be arranged on individual arms, activated by keys, and directed toward a single point. This concept, multiple type bars converging on a shared printing location, was the seed that would bloom fully in Scholz's later machine. Progan's contribution was quiet, but central. History is often shaped by such quiet hands. Section 7. The Hansen Writing Ball, 1865. If Ravizza built a writing harpsichord, Rasmus Malling Hansen built a writing planet. The Hansen Writing Ball, invented in Denmark, was a hemisphere of metal pins, each pin a key arranged in a dome shape. Pressing a key drove a metal rod downward with remarkable speed, imprinting the letter onto paper. The writing ball was fast, one of the fastest writing devices before the typewriter matured. Its speed came from its extremely short keystroke distance and direct mechanical linkage. Hansen's machine used an automatic paper feeding mechanism, a curved keyboard resting under the hands, an inked ribbon, a surprisingly lightweight frame. The design was radically different from later typewriters, so different that contemporary typists had to relearn every expectation of typing. Yet many features hinted at what would come. Letters striking at a single point, a ribbon system, rapid key depression, finger placement on a fixed array. The writing ball even used curved key placement to match finger reach, an ergonomic idea centuries ahead of its time. Friedrich Nietzsche famously used one for a period when eye strain made handwriting difficult. His surviving letters show distinctive writing ball type. But the writing ball was expensive. Its spherical keyboard was difficult to manufacture. It required expert tuning. It was not commercially scalable. Another device had already begun to take shape elsewhere, one that would combine the best features of its predecessors in a more practical, manufacturable form. And that invention came from a newspaper editor in Wisconsin. Section 8. Peter Mitterhofer's Typing Machines, 1864 to 1869. Before we reach Scholz, we must pause briefly on Peter Mitterhofer, a carpenter from the Austrian Tyrol who built a series of wooden typing machines between 1864 and 1869. Mitterhofer's devices were made largely from wood, including many of the mechanical parts. Despite the rustic materials, they featured a full keyboard, individually mounted type, a moving carriage, a guide rail, system ink rollers. He produced at least 5 prototypes, each improving upon the last. Mitterhofer's final machines were competent enough that he presented one to Emperor Franz Joseph. But wooden mechanisms wore down too quickly, so the machines were fragile. They lacked the manufacturing support needed for commercial release. Still, Mitterhofer contributed something important. The idea that a typewriter must combine both speed and durability. He also demonstrated the importance of guiding paper across a stable carriage, a mechanism that would become central in later machines. He brought craftsmanship, he brought experimentation, he brought iterative design. But it would take an American inventor, who initially had no real interest in typewriters, to bring all these separate threads together. Only after all these experiments, through decades of scattered invention, do we finally arrive at the birth of the true typewriter. Section 9. The world was ready for Scholz. By the 1860s, industrialization had transformed the landscape of invention. Factories were growing, railways were expanding. Telegraph lines stitched continents together with copper thread. Businesses needed faster documentation. Governments needed records. Newspapers needed legibility and speed. Society was ready. Technology was ready. Manufacturing was ready. All that remained was for someone to assemble the pieces. Ravizza had given the world the idea of a keyboard with type bars. Progin had shown that type bars could slide toward a single point. Thurber demonstrated the need for accessibility. Bert introduced the concept of machine-shaped characters. Mill had dreamed of a mechanical writing device before any of them. Now, in Milwaukee, Christopher Latham Scholz would gather these scattered innovations and shape them into a machine the world could finally use. A machine that would define nearly every keyboard that followed. A machine that would give birth to QWERTY. And its story begins with frustration, with mechanical jamming, and with the surprising rearrangement of the alphabet that would become the world's most widely used key layout. Part 4. Scholz, the birth of the typewriter and the emergence of QWERTY. A quiet story of invention, trial, failure, and the quiet triumph that rewired how the world writes. Let the world around you soften for a moment. Settle again into the gentle rhythm of this story. You're entering the part of history where all the threads finally begin to weave together. After centuries of chisels on wood blocks, hammers on type, ink on metal, and prototypes scattered across continents, the invention we now recognize as the typewriter was about to take shape. And, as is often the case in history, it happened not because someone set out to change the world, but because someone simply wanted to solve a personal frustration, an irritation about printing numbers. Section 1. Christopher Latham Scholes and the Accidental Invention. Christopher Latham Scholes was not a machinist, not a metalsmith, not a professional inventor. He was a printer, a newspaper editor, a man who understood the importance of words, but who worked in a world where printing was slow, tedious, and prone to error. Scholes lived in Milwaukee, where he managed newspapers, edited legislative texts, and worked with printing presses daily. His early inventions were modest. He created a machine that automatically numbered pages in books and documents. Useful for bookkeeping, useful for record keeping. A small but practical device. This numbering machine introduced him to two men who would become essential partners. Carlos Glidden, a forward-thinking inventor, and Samuel Soule, a mechanically minded colleague. Together they tinkered. Not at first with writing, just mechanical improvements for printing workflows. But inventors are often curious. They ask, what if this could do something else? What else might these parts become? One day, Glidden brought Scholes an article describing an Italian machine, the Cembalo Scrivano, that used keys to stamp letters. It ignited a spark. What if a machine like this could be built in America? What if it could solve all the frustrations of messy handwriting, slow scribes, difficult copying? Scholes was not the first person to build a writing machine, but he was about to build the first one that really worked. Section 2. The first Scholes prototype, A Crude Beginning, 1867. The earliest prototype, built around 1867, looked nothing like a typewriter. It was a small wooden contraption with keys scavenged from a telegraph machine. Each key pulled a wire that lifted a type bar, which then struck a sheet of paper. The characters were arranged in a circle on a large metal plate and printed upward. You couldn't see what you were typing. Errors were invisible until the end. The mechanism jammed constantly, and yet it worked. It made letters. It typed. For the first time in the Western world, typing felt like a feasible method of writing. Scholes and his team kept refining the design. Keyboards became more organized. The printing mechanism became more precise. Type bars moved more smoothly. Still, the machine jammed, and it jammed frequently. This jamming problem would eventually reshape the alphabet itself. Section 3. Understanding type bar jams. The mechanical limitation behind QWERTY. To understand why QWERTY exists, imagine the early Scholes machine. Picture a metal ring holding dozens of type bars like spokes on a wheel. Each type bar had a letter at its tip. When you pressed a key, the type bar swung upward toward a single point. This meant many type bars were converging, sometimes simultaneously, into the same narrow space. Fast typists and Scholes discovered early that typists could be very fast, would depress keys quicker than the type bars could return to rest. Whenever two type bars rose too close together in time, they collided, they tangled, they jammed. This was not a minor inconvenience. It made the machine almost unusable. To solve it, Scholes made a decision that would define modern typing. Separate commonly paired letters. Letters used together frequently in English, like T and H, E and R, or S and T, could not be positioned near each other on the type bar circle. If they were kept apart, Their type bars would approach the printing point from different angles, reducing collisions. Scholes examined letter frequency tables. He rearranged, reordered, experimented. Early layouts looked chaotic by today's standards. The first versions didn't spell QWERTY across the top row. They were much stranger. But each adjustment reduced jams. Each trial helped the keys stop colliding. Each new arrangement made typing smoother. The keyboard slowly transformed, and it eventually arrived at the arrangement we now know, through trial, error, and mechanical necessity. Section 4. The birth of QWERTY. An engineering solution, not a linguistic one. By the early 1870s, Scholes had settled on an arrangement that prevented most letter pair collisions. QWERTY across the top row. This arrangement did not arise because it was good for spelling. It did not arise because it was good for ergonomics. It did not arise because it was intuitive. It arose because of machinery, because type bars were fragile, because jamming was a constant threat. The keyboard you use today, the QWERTY arrangement, printed on millions of laptops, phones, and computer keyboards, exists because two metal arms kept crashing into each other in a Milwaukee workshop in the 1870s. Every time you touch a QWERTY key, you're touching the solution to a 150-year-old mechanical problem. This arrangement solved most of the jamming issues, but Scholes himself was still not convinced of commercial success. That step required intervention from someone with manufacturing power, someone who could turn an idea into a business, and that someone was the Remington Company. Section 5. The Remington Deal. When sewing machines met typewriting. In 1873, Scholes and Glidden sold their design to E. Remington and Sons, a company known for manufacturing rifles, agricultural equipment, and, importantly, sewing machines. The sewing machine side of Remington's business was crucial because they already possessed skilled metal workers, large-scale production facilities, expertise in crafting mechanical linkages, finely tuned manufacturing tolerances. The Scholes and Glidden typewriter became the first commercially produced typewriter in 1874. Remington's engineers refined the machine dramatically. They added a sturdier frame, improved the type bars, enhanced the key action, introduced the concept of shift, though not yet for uppercase, and most famously, they added something visually iconic: the black and gold floral decals, reminiscent of sewing machine ornamentation. The machine printed only uppercase letters. It could not yet type lowercase. You still couldn't see what you typed. Text was printed on the underside of the platen. Errors were impossible to correct until the page was removed. But it worked. It typed at a speed handwriting could not match. And it launched an industry. Section 6. Competition, refinement, and the rise of professional typing. After Remington released the typewriter, manufacturers across the United States and Europe rushed to enter the new typewriter market. Each company experimented with improvements: visible typing mechanisms, lighter type bars, carriages that moved horizontally, ribbon spools that reversed automatically, shift keys that allowed uppercase and lowercase, better key placement, quieter action. Some companies created wildly different layouts. Some introduced circular keyboards. Some used column-based arrangements. Yet QWERTY continued to spread because Remington's early dominance gave it a crucial head start. Typing schools emerged. Secretarial training programs standardized techniques. Businesses invested in specific machines and did not want to retrain staff. By the end of the 19th century, QWERTY was embedded deeply into the professional world. The pattern became self-reinforcing. People learned QWERTY because machines used it. Machines used it because people learned it. The layout became destiny. Section 7. Why Dvorak didn't replace QWERTY. In the 1930s, Dr. August Dvorak created a new keyboard layout designed for speed and efficiency. It reduced finger travel. It optimized common letter combinations. It improved comfort. Studies showed impressive benefits, but businesses cannot afford to replace equipment or retrain employees. Standardization had already won. The mechanical reasons behind QWERTY were long gone. Modern typewriters no longer jammed for the reasons Scholz's machine did, but the layout remained. Today, smartphones, laptops, tablets, and desktops still carry the legacy of those metal type bars. QWERTY is no longer a mechanical necessity. It is a cultural habit, one carried across generations. And now we move into the final chapter of this long journey, how the typewriter evolved into early computer keyboards, and how the legacy of mechanical constraints continues to shape modern digital design. Part 5, From Type Bars to Circuits. The quiet survival of QWERTY, a gentle winding down of centuries of invention as the clatter of type bars fades into the hum of electricity. The metal typewriter, with its clack of levers and its steady rhythm of keys striking inked ribbon, defined the written world for more than a century. Secretaries, journalists, novelists, students, clerks, office workers, and government typists shaped their days around its cadence. Yet, even as the mechanical typewriter reached its peak, new technologies began quietly brewing beneath its surface. Electricity hummed through homes and offices. Telegraph lines pulsed with coded messages. Early computers dumped out text on vast rolls of paper. The world was changing. The idea of writing was changing with it. And still, through every shift and transformation, one thing remained untouched. The familiar, slightly unusual arrangement of keys across the top row. QWERTY. This last section of the journey explores how that arrangement survived transitions that should have erased it, and how the invisible lines of history still run beneath your fingertips every time you type. So settle back again. Let the story slow to a soft drift, the way the last few pages of a long book ease toward their end. We begin with a new era. Electricity. Section 1. The first electric typewriters. When machines learned to assist the hands, by the early 20th century, typewriters have become essential tools of business. The Remington Company no longer stood alone. Underwood, Smith Corona, Royal, and dozens of other manufacturers filled offices with machines. Yet mechanical typewriters still relied entirely on human force. Each key press had to drive a type bar with enough energy to strike the ribbon and leave a crisp letter. Typists developed strong fingers and distinctive calluses. Long days of typing left wrists sore, arms stiff, shoulders aching. Electric motors offered a solution. The earliest electric typewriters emerged in the 1920s and 1930s. They were heavy, substantial metal creatures with humming motors mounted inside their frames. The keys no longer needed to lift a type bar directly. Instead, pressing a key engaged a motorized mechanism that did the striking. This allowed lighter keystrokes, faster repetition, reduced fatigue, consistent strength in every letter. The letters still struck the paper mechanically, though now with electrically driven force. These machines felt smoother, quieter, more responsive. But beneath the improvements, the keyboard remained familiar. Companies could not afford to retrain armies of typists. so QWERTY stayed. Even electricity could not dislodge it. Section 2. The IBM Selectric, the typewriter that became a bridge to computers. In 1961, IBM released a machine that changed everything about typing except for one part, the keyboard layout. The IBM Selectric replaced type bars entirely with a single spherical typing element, the golf ball. Instead of dozens of arms converging at a single point, only this ball moved, rotating and tilting to bring the appropriate letter into position before striking the ribbon. This solved almost every mechanical problem that had plagued typewriters. No type bar jams, no tangled arms, no uneven strikes, no sluggish linkages. It also allowed easy switching of fonts by replacing the ball. The Selectric was fast, smooth, precise, quieter, more reliable. For many people in the mid-20th century, it was the finest writing machine ever made. It became a favorite among professional typists and was embraced by businesses and government offices worldwide. And yet, the keyboard remained QWERTY. Why? Because switching the layout would require retraining millions of typists. Companies feared the financial cost, the risk of slowed productivity, the disruption to office workflow. The layout had become too deeply rooted. The Selectric was a technological turning point, but it also became the quiet bridge between pure mechanical writing and the digital systems yet to come. And on that bridge walked another machine, one that printed without striking at all. Section 3. Teletypes. When writing began traveling across wires while typewriters evolved inside offices, another branch of typing technology emerged in the world of communication, the teletype. These machines were designed not only to create letters on paper, but to send them hundreds or thousands of kilometers through electrical impulses. Teletypes became essential to news agencies, railroads, military installations, financial institutions, shipping companies. A reporter in London could type a message that printed instantly in New York. A railway operator could send instructions across an entire system from a single console. Encoding signals from a keyboard could activate remote relays, switches, and relays. Teletypes were the beginning of typing as digital input. And much like typewriters, teletypes used QWERTY. It was the simplest choice for workers already trained in typing. Standardization kept systems compatible. The keyboard had become more than a mechanical necessity. It had become a language of its own. Even when type bars were replaced by electrical signals, the shape of QWERTY remained. And soon, those signals would feed into machines, unlike anything the world had ever seen. Section 4. Early computers and the persistence of familiar patterns. In the 1940s and 1950s, early computers filled entire rooms with vacuum tubes, switches, and miles of wiring. They were programmed with punched cards or paper tape. Their output often printed on enormous sheets via teletype-like devices. These computers required human operators, people who understood coding systems, mechanical logic, and the fragile nature of early electronics. Eventually, as computers grew more flexible, interfaces began to appear. Consoles with key input, terminals with printed output, screens that displayed characters, monitors that updated in real time. At every stage, designers asked the same question: what should the keyboard look like? By then, millions of typists knew QWERTY. Secretarial schools taught it. Business courses instructed it. Offices required it. Newspapers relied on it. Changing the layout would have introduced massive friction in workplaces already undergoing transitions to electronic systems. So designers chose QWERTY. Even though digital systems no longer required spacing letters to prevent mechanical interference, even though the logic that created QWERTY had vanished, even though ergonomic alternatives existed, QWERTY remained because humans remained. Machines changed, but human habits did not. Section 5. The birth of the modern computer, keyboard. By the 1970s and 1980s, personal computers became more common. The IBM Model M, released in 1985, cemented a standard that still shapes keyboards today. The staggered rows, the function keys, the modifier keys, the broad spacebar, the numeric row. And, of course, the QWERTY letter arrangement. The Model M introduced the buckling spring mechanism, which produced a crisp, tactile feel. Its layout influenced countless designs that followed. As computers spread into homes, schools, and businesses, typing shifted from professional skill to everyday experience. People wrote letters, essays, reports, memos, emails. The typewriter faded quietly from offices. The Selectric gave way to digital text. Teletypes handed their legacy to early terminals. Yet through all of it, QWERTY stayed. It became the default for global communication. The one layout that transcended continents and industries. The pattern printed on billions of devices. And then, one final transition sealed its fate. Section 6. QWERTY moves to smaller screens. When mobile phones first included text input, they lacked full keyboards. But as technology improved and touchscreen devices emerged, designers needed a reliable layout. Human memory offered the answer. People already knew where each letter belonged on a QWERTY keyboard. So smartphones adapted QWERTY to small screens. Tablets followed. Laptops adopted smaller, more compact versions. The layout, born of clattering type bars and mechanical constraints that no longer existed, found new life in digital glass. Today, when someone types on a cheap smartphone in Melbourne, or a laptop in Tokyo, or a tablet in Cairo, they use a keyboard shaped by 19th century metal arms. The past lives under their thumbs. Section 7. A quiet reflection. The long line of invention beneath your fingers. Pause for a moment and imagine pressing a single key, any key, on a modern keyboard. Behind that single keystroke lies the carved wood of early Chinese printing blocks, the preserved scrolls of the Diamond Sutra. The molten metals of Gutenberg's hand mold the rhythmic strength of the printing press, the curious patents of Henry Mill, the wooden linkages of Mitterhofer, the elegant arms of Revisor's writing harpsichord, the lightning-fast rods of the Hansen writing ball, the jamming type bars in Scholz's workshop, the polished brass of the Remington factory, the humming motors of early electric typewriters, the spinning type balls of the Selectric, the chattering gears of teletypes, the glow of early computer terminals, the hum of modern laptops, the quiet tap of touchscreen keyboards. Every letter typed today carries centuries of lineage, not simply mechanical evolution, but a human story of persistence, experimentation, frustration, creativity, and connection. The keyboard beneath your hands is not merely a device. It is a museum of ideas, built layer by layer by people who dreamed of faster ways to write. And even though QWERTY began as a workaround, a clever engineering hack, it has become a familiar rhythm, a quiet standard, a shape that millions recognize instinctively. Every time your fingers drift across the keys, they move across history. Closing notes. A gentle ending to a long journey. As this story winds to its close, imagine all the people who contributed to the evolution of writing. Scribes bending over clay tablets, monks illuminating manuscripts by candlelight, Chinese artisans carving blocks for Buddhist sutras, Gutenberg casting metal letters by hand, inventors shaping wooden prototypes, engineers refining metal linkages, typists learning new machines, coders designing early computers, millions of everyday people typing messages, stories, ideas. In every age, the desire was the same: to leave marks in the world, to share thoughts, to connect. Writing is an unbroken thread stretching backward through time. And the keyboard beneath your fingers is the most recent knot in that thread. When you next type a sentence, perhaps the echoes of these centuries will feel a little closer. The weight of history resting lightly in every keystroke. I think our night has come to a close. Thank you again for listening, my friend, and I hope to see you again in another video soon. Sleep well.